Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, when is leaking classified information a crime in America, and when is it not? That is something that the White House, which leaks like a sieve, gets to decide. That anti-Islam film that caused outrage after going up on YouTube is staying on YouTube in most countries. Who is really addicted to violence? Palestinian protesters?
This woman on your screen wanted to kill Israelis.
Or the media that cover them? And what would George Orwell make of our 21st century surveillance society?
Heed this mantra: who controls the internet controls the data.
Our web video of the week. It's been 11 years since the 9/11 attacks and 17 months since the raid that killed Osama bin Laden, yet the late al-Qaeda leader remains a central figure in the 2012 race for the White House. The Obama campaign constantly trots out bin Laden's name to underscore the president's national security credentials. And the White House has been accused of selectively leaking information, that's classified information, about bin Laden's assassination in order to score political points. And it's not just leaking to news organizations. It is alleged that the White House has been leaking to Hollywood, which has a major movie on the bin Laden killing in production. The fundamental contradiction in all of this is that the Obama White House is tough on leakers. As we've reported before here at The Listening Post, this administration has used the Espionage Act to prosecute more leakers of classified information than all previous administrations combined. Our starting point this week is Washington, where the American media are working with a White House that has one policy for leaks it likes and another for leakers it doesn't like.
After a firefight, they killed Osama bin Laden.
The charge of hypocrisy in terms of what information gets out on the Osama bin Laden raid is valid.
Osama bin Laden has been killed.
The administration has furnished access to a Hollywood production team. At the same time, it's trying to crack down on leaks.
Controversy that has Hollywood and Washington buzzing.
The notion that they are cooperating when it comes to Hollywood, but evasive and controlling when it comes to the media.
We do not share anything that is inappropriate with anybody.
Is really quite remarkable.
There's a war of narratives of how do we use bin Laden in this election season.
Osama bin Laden is dead.
And it seems to be becoming quite a bloody war.
Osama bin Laden, the prime target in the so-called war on terror, is now a potent weapon in the war for the White House. And the president's party deployed bin Laden's name constantly at the Democratic National Convention.
Ask Osama bin Laden if he is better off now than he was 4 years ago.
I decided going into this that I wanted to do a count of how many times the Democratic speakers mentioned Osama bin Laden, because we knew this was going to be a major recurring theme at the convention. So I sat there on my television. Every time a speaker mentioned Osama bin Laden, I would take a count. It ended up being 21 counts.
Osama bin Laden.
Osama bin Laden. Osama bin Laden.
A 21 soundbite salute over America's former public enemy number one. Democrats ate it up, so did most of the voices in the U.S. media, with a few notable exceptions.
Regarding the way that Osama bin Laden's name was used by the Democrats at the convention, it really felt like we were watching a parade of jingoism that belonged in a sports bar.
Bin Laden season has also included a new book on the raid, penned by one of the Navy SEALs involved.
Owen was on the helicopter that crashed into the compound. He was the second man in bin Laden's bedroom.
The Pentagon has threatened to have the author prosecuted.
For what, in our estimation, is a material breach of non-disclosure agreements.
Which would be in line with the Obama administration's aggressive pursuit of other Americans who have revealed classified information, including whistleblowers. However, charges have yet to be laid, perhaps because that would leave the administration open to accusations of hypocrisy, since the White House has already leaked information on the raid selectively, tactically.
The raid and the killing of bin Laden really skirted up against a lot of questions of legality in the international world. And so part of the story that the Obama administration was telling was a way to gain legitimacy for this operation, if not in the court of law, in the court of world opinion.
It's like all administrations, they're careful not to leave obvious fingerprints on those leaks, but it clearly happens. And within days there were stories in our paper and others about the use of new stealth drones to surveil the compound where bin Laden had been hiding, and then a series of stories on details of the raid itself.
For example, there was a New Yorker article that appeared that gave a very vivid account of the Osama bin Laden raid. And it was a long article, and people were surprised when it came out later that the reporter had not spoken to Navy SEALs themselves. He suggested in a live chat afterwards that he had spoken to intelligence, military, and White House officials.
Everybody's making the assumption, and I assume it's probably true, that that was a very strategic story given to this particular reporter and withheld from a lot of other reporters. I think the story that has a lot of people in the traditional media rather steamed is the apparent negotiations the White House has been having with Hollywood to create a movie regarding the raid.
Did the Obama administration leak classified information about the killing of Osama bin Laden to Hollywood filmmakers?
And not just anybody in Hollywood. The White House has been working with A-list director Kathryn Bigelow, who has already won an Academy Award for a film about war, The Hurt Locker.
Where was the last time you saw bin Laden?
Bigelow's new film, Zero Dark 30, tells the story of the bin Laden raid, and the email traffic between Washington and Hollywood makes for interesting reading.
What's been most revealing so far has been emails that have surfaced through Freedom of Information Act requests that show how the administration and public affairs officials at the CIA in particular were trying to move this along, trying to enhance cooperation with this Hollywood team because they saw a big public relations gain in the end.
The Kathryn Bigelow movie has caused an enormous amount of controversy among mainstream media who are saying, hey, you want to cooperate and tell a tale using Hollywood, but you don't want trained journalists who understand really the issues of national security and how defense works and how foreign policy works. You don't want the people who actually understand what's going on with this story to report on it in an objective way, but you're perfectly willing to talk to Hollywood?
That sort of collusion between politics and Hollywood is not new. It's been going on since World War I. Movies such as The Little American were created with presidents to support World War I. Films such as Why We Fight and World War II were made to support political agendas.
Why are we Americans on the march?
So there has often been a real strong way that political leaders have been trying to gain support for their policy objectives, not only through traditional media platforms, but also through what we might think of as traditional cultural platforms, such as film.
We are still no closer to defeating our enemy.
For Osama bin Laden, who railed against America and its decadent ways, getting the Hollywood treatment posthumously may be the ultimate indignity. And this White House, which is so tough on national security leaks, allegedly spilling secrets of its own, just to make the president look good, may be the ultimate in hypocrisy.
When somebody in an unauthorized way releases it, it's a leak. And when somebody at the top decides to reveal it, then it's just important information that needs to be shared with the public. So is that hypocritical? You bet it is. But I think it's also reality.
Our Global Village voice is now on the American news media, leaks, and the White House.
Barack Obama, I think, is really eager to talk about Osama bin Laden being dead. And you don't hear Barack Obama talking very much about Afghanistan. You don't hear very much attempted discussion with the media about Guantanamo Bay. But you do hear about troops coming home from Iraq, and you especially hear, we heard it at the Democratic National Convention last week, about Osama bin Laden being dead.
Absolutely, there's a double standard for leaks coming out of the Obama administration. The standard seems to be on what makes the administration look good. So information coming out about the Osama bin Laden raid or information justifying the administration's drone program is allowed to be leaked into the public, tons of detail, and there's very few consequences for that. Whereas information that embarrasses the government, the Obama administration has punished, and it's punished those kinds of so-called leaks, which are really whistleblowing disclosures, in an unprecedented fashion.
It's time for Listening Post News Bites. Google is refusing to take down clips from the anti-Islam film that provoked those attacks on U.S. embassies in North Africa and protests elsewhere in the Muslim world. Google, which owns YouTube, said in a statement, "This video, which is widely available on the web, is clearly within our guidelines and so will stay on YouTube. However, given the very difficult situation in Libya and Egypt, we have temporarily restricted access in both countries." A trailer of the film, Innocence of Muslims, was posted on YouTube in July, but only in English. It wasn't until the Arabic version came online September 4th that the clip was picked up by Arab TV stations like the Egyptian religious channel Al Nas. The film ridicules the Prophet Muhammad and describes Islam as a cancer. 4 Americans were killed at the U.S. consulate in Benghazi, including the ambassador, Chris Stevens. Google's dilemma over whether to leave the film clips up on YouTube encapsulates the quandary faced by many internet companies to balance free speech with ethical concerns in an age when social media can impact world events in real and sometimes violent ways. The biggest media trial in Turkish history is now underway. 44 Kurdish journalists are facing terrorism charges in Istanbul. 36 of them have been held since last December for their coverage of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, the PKK, which is labeled a terrorist organization by Turkey, the U.S., and the EU. Many work for Kurdish media outlets. Turkey's Interior Minister Idris Şahin has compared PKK fighters to journalists and writers. He said there is, quote, "no difference between the bullets fired in the South Kurdish area of Turkey and the articles written in Ankara," unquote. Free speech activists claim the government is trying to intimidate and punish the pro-Kurdish press. There are reportedly more than 100 journalists already behind bars in Turkey. That's more than either Iran or China, and a further 800 are awaiting trial. In Ukraine, the Yanukovych government has been accused of trying to stifle independent media ahead of next month's parliamentary elections. According to the TV station TVI, cable companies have come under pressure to either drop the station or move it to more expensive packages, thereby significantly reducing its viewer base. That follows a tax evasion charge in July against the company's CEO, which has since been dropped. According to independent media observers, the private news network is being targeted because it carries out investigative journalism and has taken a critical stance on the government. Hundreds of demonstrators have been in the streets of the capital, Kiev, to support freedom of expression, which they say has been under threat ever since the Yanukovych government came to power in 2010. The Paris-based Press Freedom Group, Reporters Without Borders, put it this way: "We urge the authorities in the interests of diversity in news and information to take legal steps and concrete action as quickly as possible and restore some balance to the broadcasting sector." Back in March, when we featured Indian political cartoonist Asim Trivedi, his biggest problem was getting around online censorship. Now he faces court charges that include insulting national honor and violating internet laws. The charges relate to work published on Trivedi's website, Cartoons Against Corruption, during last year's anti-corruption protests. In one of those cartoons, the customary 3 lions in India's national emblem were replaced by 3 wolves with the message "Long live corruption." In another, the Indian parliament is depicted as a giant toilet bowl. India's information minister, Ambika Soni, defended the arrest, saying that the government does not believe in censorship, but that there are certain ground rules that all Indians must follow. Critics are calling this the latest move in an ongoing battle over online censorship between the state and free speech advocates. One of India's most respected daily newspapers, The Hindu, wrote, "The latest victim of this anachronistic colonial-era law is a young cartoonist, arrested for no more than lampooning the corrupt and venal state of affairs in the country." When covering the media, the natural starting point is to look at output, what news organizations are putting out there. Sometimes, though, it helps to look at what we're not seeing. Over the past few years, the Palestine-Israel conflict has quietly slipped out of the headlines. Part of that has to do with the novelty factor in the story of the Arab Spring, which has been widely covered. But there's more to it than that. A few months back, a significant story came out of Palestine, but it did not involve violence, stone throwing, or suicide bombings, which is why you may not even know that Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails went on a mass hunger strike. Now, hunger strikes are not unprecedented, and not all of them are considered newsworthy. But what set this one apart was the sheer scale of it. An estimated 2,000 prisoners going without food to protest conditions behind bars. Why don't more people know about this story? Why didn't the media give it the attention it deserved? And what lessons should Palestinians take when, having been lectured by the international community to turn their back on violence in favor of non-violent forms of protest, they find that when they follow that advice and use the most non-violent form of protest possible, a hunger strike, the media just aren't interested. The Listening Post's Flo Phillips now on some of the harsh realities of the news business as they pertain to the current state of the Palestine-Israel story.
For the past 21 months, millions of protesters throughout the Middle East have been rebelling against age-old repressive regimes. For some, the fight was relatively short. For others, it is far from over. Throughout, the media have hardly missed a beat.
Sectarian violence continues.
Until now. Peaceful Palestinian resistance, the current course of action in the Israel-Palestine conflict, the region's longest-running dispute, hasn't exactly been getting top billing in the news bulletins.
I think one of the misconceptions of covering the Arab Spring has been that the Palestine story is no longer relevant to the Arab street, and I think this is a big mistake because I don't think it's true. Palestinians have been peacefully resisting occupation for decades, and yet their plight didn't receive the same kind of coverage that other Arab revolts did.
With what is happening in the Arab revolutions, global media is distracted, but when all other issues are resolved, the Palestinian crisis will remain.
April 17th is Palestinian Prisoners' Day, and it was marked by the start of the mass hunger strike by Palestinian prisoners held in Israeli jails. Some detained without charge. As many as 2,000 prisoners saying they went without food for 28 days.
To conceive of a hunger strike that lasts that long and not to report it as major news does seem strange to me. One would have thought both TV and the print media would seize the occasion to talk about a new phase in the conflict, but this just hasn't happened.
Palestinians, they've had another struggle, which is the war of words or war of media, which they do not get covered. People would say it's complicated, but it's not complicated. For me, it's very simple. The silence from the mainstream media was deafening.
Well, I'm not sure that the international media has it out for the Palestinians. There is no conference call every morning where everybody in the international media gets on the line and says, let's not cover the Palestinian story today. That's different than saying that the international media may not give the kind of coverage to the Palestinian issue that Palestinians want or deserve. And I'm quite sure that it is an undercovered issue.
Palestinians have been lectured on the merits of non-violent protest for years.
Palestinians must abandon violence. Resistance through violence and killing is wrong, and it does not succeed.
And not just by politicians. Some Western journalists echoed the call.
Nonviolent resistance offers a reed of hope for a future here of less violence and more change.
But when it's quiet, reporters aren't nearly as interested in covering the story.
The deal has now been signed.
It took a long time of going without food for the prisoners' peaceful protest to make headlines.
The coverage of the prisoner story was a print story. There were editorial pieces in European media, some coverage in American press. The print coverage was strong. It was talking about a new phenomena. It was talking about Palestinians going hungry for freedom. That's a very strong message, if you will. But we didn't see that follow through into TV.
I think the reason this story has gotten as little coverage as it has is it is not perceived as an earth-changing, earth-shaking event. It is seen as another protest in a region that's filled with protests. It is not on the par of hundreds of thousands of people filling Tahrir Square. It is not endangering a regime. So it has a special threshold that it has to meet.
Could that threshold be the visual test? Is a protest behind bars, beyond the reach of the news cameras, simply a case of out of sight, out of mind for news organizations? And then there's the larger question. Are the non-violent forms of protest that Palestinians have been urged to use just not visual enough for the picture-hungry media? Remember, when it comes to covering conflict, the Gaza war in 2008, suicide bombers, border confrontations, pictures are everywhere. Not now.
There is a lack of patience in dealing with the Palestinian issue. The international media just wants to see blood, rockets and destruction. If that destruction increases, that's when they give us attention.
Tactics that don't have the visual drama of violence are far less likely to be treated as important media events.
This woman on your screen wanted to kill Israelis by setting off a bomb strapped to her own body.
It also reflects a broader failure to interpret a series of developments on the Palestinian side, including their peaceful protests against the separation wall. One would have thought that a shift of this magnitude from armed resistance to nonviolent forms of opposition would attract a great deal of attention.
At times, the lack of coverage appears political. Compare the huge international coverage last October that came with the release of a single Israeli soldier.
A lone, frail figure emerged blinking into the glare of publicity after
Gilad
5 years
Shalit.
of captivity.
As much as some advocates for the Palestinian side would argue there's a double standard in the coverage of these stories, and it's rooted in politics, some Palestinian media outlets were not above playing politics themselves when it came to covering the hunger strike.
As Palestinians, we have shortcomings in spreading and explaining our issues and suffering to the world. There are Palestinian media whom I did not see at all. They didn't even invite me on their news channels. And this is hurtful, because those channels are not a genuine platform for the Palestinian people. The Arabic and Palestinian media space should be open to all.
Local media did a really poor job of covering the hunger strikes. A group of people, they asked the store owners, they asked normal people, passers-by in the street, if they knew the names of the hunger strikers. And the majority of the people, like let's say 90% of those who were interviewed, they had no clue, they had no idea. And this also goes back to the local media. Every TV station in Palestine is politically affiliated.
The mass hunger strike is yet another phase, another development in a 45-year-old story of occupation and resistance in Palestine. And just because other Arab countries are in various states of upheaval, just because fewer stones are being cast in Palestine, that doesn't mean that what's happening behind bars in Israeli prisons is not news.
Everybody thinks when things are quiet, there is no story in Palestine. This is when there is a story in Palestine, because something is changing. The dynamics are changing, and it's a missed opportunity.
More Global Village Voices now on the coverage of the Palestine-Israel story.
I think the poor media coverage of the Palestinian hunger strikes is reflective of wider problems of bias. One Israeli soldier is worth more than 1,000 nameless Palestinian prisoners. Palestinian violence is considered terrorism, and the violence of the Israeli military is considered defensive. And that security paradigm shapes so much of how the Western media covers Palestine-Israel.
The American media found the story to be of little interest. Whenever the story was being discussed, you had Israeli officials speaking. They had more time to address the issue than Palestinians. The media really did not do a good job at all.
Finally, Juice Media calls itself a news source for the discerning viewer. It first caught our attention back in 2010 with its satirical newscasts called Rap News. Anchorman Robert Foster has a way with a rhyme and a way of getting at important issues. Rap News' latest installment deals with the surge of internet surveillance in countries that call themselves free. Some of you might recognize the Pentagon pundit, General Baxter, from his previous appearances. And Rap News has brought a well-known novelist back from the grave to comment on the perils of an increasingly Orwellian world. Our web video of the week has already got more than 100,000 hits online, and you know at least one of those viewers is Big Brother. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
Welcome back. This evening we're actively delving in depth to facts which affect all of us who dwell on this internet. To find out, we connect with our first guest to comment on the matter. We're live at the Panopticon with General Baxter.
Behold the latest weapon in the war of terror. Our greatest invention since 9/11. Guaranteed to keep us free and safe forever. I give you the surveillance state, ladies and generals.
Brilliant. Thank you, General. We now interview our resident guru, Terrence Moonseed, for a different view. Greetings. How does this situation look? I have one word for you, Robert. Double plus I'm good. The world populace of 7.4 billion are all headed in the direction of Orwellian totalitarian oblivion. General, why weren't we informed about this?
Sorry we didn't tell you about our grand plan before. It was meant to be a surprise, under wraps and in store. But some spoil sports had to go and ruin it for all by blowing whistles in spite of the damn law.
Sorry to interrupt, but we're picking up a signal from beyond the space-time continuum. Quick, switch on the juice channeling portal. Wait, is that George Orwell?
Good day to you.
I tried to warn you noobs, but I see you are actually fools, or else you thought this was an instruction manual. Yes, so can you advise us? What would you have us do? An open and universal internet is the most effective tool you have to address the issues that afflict the world at hand. Therefore, protecting it is the most essential task that stands before your generation. I think I understand. Big Brother brings chilling effects, freezing our collective hopes. He doesn't protect our safety, but protects the status quo, and threatens this internet, the one channel yet uncontrolled, whose openness we are now called upon to effect and uphold.